74,000 years ago, the sky over Southeast Asia turned to ash. And for a moment, our entire species may have fit inside a single football stadium. Not a city, not a country, a stadium. Every human being alive today, every scientist, every soldier, every farmer, every child could be a descendant of a handful of survivors who watched the sun disappear and somehow, impossible, kept walking. This is the story of Toba, the volcano that almost ended us before we ever began. Let me take you back. Picture the Earth at 74,000 years ago. There are no cities, no writing, no wheels, no farming. Our ancestors, anatomically modern humans, people with our brains, our hands, our capacity for grief and hope, are scattered thin across Africa, maybe pushing tentatively into Arabia and the Middle East. Total population? Nobody knows for sure, but not many. Small bands, hunting, gathering, burying their dead, painting with ochre, telling stories under stars they had no names for. And on the island of Sumatra, in what is now Indonesia, something has been quietly loading for hundreds of thousands of years. Deep beneath the crust, magma has been pooling, not a chamber, a reservoir, a slow, patient, monstrous accumulation of molten rock, building pressure the way a wound-up spring builds pressure. Kilometer after kilometer of superheated stone, dissolved gas straining against the rock above it like a fist against a door. And then, one day, the door gives. Here's what makes Toba different from every volcano you've ever seen on the news. Mount St. Helens in 1980 was terrifying. It flattened forests. It killed people. It made headlines around the world. It ejected roughly 1 cubic kilometer of material. Toba ejected somewhere in the range of 2,800 cubic kilometers. Read that again. Not 2 times bigger. Not 10 times, roughly 2,800 times the volume of Mount St. Helens. It is one of the largest volcanic eruptions in the entire history of our planet's last few million years, and it happened while our ancestors were alive to see it. This isn't a mountain exploding. This is a section of the Earth's crust, an area you could fit a small country inside of, deciding to go somewhere else. When Toba erupted, it didn't just blow its top, it collapsed. So much material was ejected so fast that the ground above the emptied magma chamber had nothing left to stand on, and it fell in on itself, creating a hole in the earth roughly 100 kilometers long and 30 kilometers wide. That hole is still there. Today, it's filled with water. It's called Lake Toba, and it's one of the largest volcanic lakes on the planet, a place where tourists take boat trips and eat lunch on the shore, blissfully floating over the scar of one of the worst days in Earth's history. But the hole is the boring part. The hole is just the receipt. What Toba actually did was reach up. The eruption column punched through the troposphere, the weather layer, the part of the atmosphere where clouds live and rain falls out. It kept going. It shoved ash and sulfur compounds into the stratosphere, tens of kilometers up, into a layer where there is no rain, no weather, no mechanism to wash anything back down. Ash is heavy. Ash falls. But sulfur up there does something far more sinister. It forms tiny droplets, aerosols, that hang in the high atmosphere like a permanent haze. And those droplets do one job with brutal efficiency. They reflect sunlight back into space. Toba blanketed the region in ash. We know this because we can still find it. There is a layer of Toba's ash. Geologists call it the youngest Toba tuff. Spread across India, sometimes meters thick. It's been found in the Indian Ocean, in the South China Sea, in Malaysia. It rained down over an area of millions of square kilometers. In some places, you could dig down today, put your hand in the dirt, and touch the exact moment. Imagine being alive underneath that. You don't understand volcanoes. You don't have a word for super-eruption. What you have is a day that starts normally. You're gathering food. You're watching your children. You're doing the 1,000 small things that make up a life. And then there's a sound, not thunder, something older and lower and wrong. And the horizon starts to change color. And then the sky begins to fall. Gray, fine, endless. It settles on the leaves you eat. It settles in the water you drink. It gets in your lungs, in your eyes, in the fur of the animals you hunt, and it does not stop. It falls for days. And when it finally stops, the light doesn't come back. Because here's the second act of the disaster, the part that lasted long after the noise stopped. Volcanic winter, those sulfur aerosols, hanging in the stratosphere, dimmed the sun. And when you dim the sun, the planet gets cold. Estimates for exactly how cold vary a lot. This is one of the most fiercely debated numbers in the whole field, but many models suggest a global cooling of several degrees Celsius, sustained for years. Several degrees doesn't sound like much when you're arguing about the thermostat, but globally, several degrees is the difference between a world and a different world. Growing seasons collapse, rainfall patterns break, forests thin out into scrub, rivers change, the plants die, so the animals that eat plants die, so the animals that eat those animals die. And humans, remember, are animals that eat those animals. For a species already living on the edge, no agriculture, no storage, no safety net, no ability to move faster than you can walk. A multi-year crash in the food supply isn't a hardship, it's an extinction event in slow motion. And this is where the story gets truly strange, because when geneticists went looking at human DNA, modern human DNA, yours and mine, they found something they didn't expect. For a species spread across the entire planet with billions of members, we are shockingly, weirdly similar to each other. There is more genetic diversity within a single troop of chimpanzees in one African forest than there is across the entire human population of Earth. Think about that. Every human race, every population, every continent, genetically, we are one small, tightly related family wearing different clothes. And the standard explanation for that kind of pattern is called a population bottleneck. Something happened at some point that squeezed our ancestors down to a very small number. And when a population gets that small, it loses genetic variation permanently. The survivor's DNA becomes everyone's DNA forever. Some estimates for that bottleneck have suggested that the breeding population of modern humans dropped into the low thousands. Some proposed figures go even lower. And in the 1990s, an anthropologist named Stanley Ambrose looked at these two facts sitting next to each other, a super-eruption around 74,000 years ago and a genetic bottleneck somewhere in that general window, and asked the obvious, chilling question: what if they're the same event? That's the Toba catastrophe hypothesis. The idea that a single volcano in Indonesia nearly erased our species, that we are all descended from the ragged remnant that made it through the ash. It's an incredible story. It's been in textbooks. It's been on television. It is, genuinely, one of the most cinematic ideas in all of prehistory. And here's where I have to be honest with you, because the truth is more interesting than the legend. A lot of scientists now think that story is wrong, or at least badly overstated, because when researchers went looking for the wreckage, they kept not finding it. In India, archaeologists dug through sites where the Toba ash layer is right there in the ground, a hard, undeniable line marking the day it happened. And they looked at the stone tools below the ash and the stone tools above the ash, and people were still there. The tool-making traditions continue across the ash layer. Somebody was living in that landscape before Toba, and somebody was living in that landscape after Toba, doing broadly the same things. Not a hard stop, not a graveyard. Continuity. In South Africa, at coastal sites, researchers found Toba's chemical fingerprint, microscopic glass shards, carried across an entire ocean, sitting in layers where humans were actively living. And on both sides of that layer, the human occupation looks robust. Some evidence even suggests those populations were doing fine. Meanwhile, climate scientists began pushing back on the most extreme cooling estimates. Some newer modeling suggests the volcanic winter may have been shorter, or more regionally variable, or less globally devastating than the apocalyptic early versions claimed. And geneticists have pointed out that a bottleneck signal in DNA is a blurry thing. It doesn't come with a date stamp, and it can be produced by processes that have nothing to do with volcanoes, like small founding populations migrating out of Africa. So the scientific consensus has shifted. Toba was unquestionably one of the most violent events our species has ever witnessed, but it may not have been the near extinction we imagined. Humans, it turns out, might be harder to kill than that. And honestly, that might be the better story, because think about what that actually means. It means that somewhere in India, under a sky choked with ash from a mountain 1,000 miles away, in a world where the sun had gone dim and the plants were dying and the animals were vanishing, somebody sat down, picked up a stone, and kept making tools. They didn't know if it would end. They didn't know why it was happening. They had no explanation, no science, no comfort. They just had each other and the knowledge in their hands and the stubborn, unreasonable decision to keep going for one more day. And they did. That's the thing about Toba. Whether it nearly wiped us out or whether we shrugged it off harder than anyone expected, the message underneath is the same. Our existence is not guaranteed. It never was. We are here because a small, cold, hungry group of people 74,000 years ago refused to stop walking. And Toba isn't gone, by the way. Supervolcanoes don't retire. There's one under Yellowstone. There's one in New Zealand. There's one in Italy. They are quiet now, the way Toba was quiet for hundreds of thousands of years, right up until the moment it wasn't. So the next time you're having a bad day, the next time everything feels like too much, remember this. You come from people who watched the sky turn gray and fall on their heads, and they kept going. That's the only reason you're here to hear this at all.